Greetings, microscopists. This is Eric Miller from Instructinate, and today I'd like to talk to you about a new electron microscope manufacturer that will be entering the US market now in 2025. This company is called Ciqtek, and they've already sold instruments in 40 countries in markets like China, South Korea, Mexico, Europe, and a whole bunch of other places. They are expanding at an incredible rate, so I wanted to discuss with all of you what is currently known about this company and their instruments. What kind of products are they making? How have they grown so fast? What does this mean for you as a consumer of electron microscopes? I'm sorry this video is likely to be a bit long, but there is a lot of information I want to talk about, and I hope that this will spur more discussion on the subject. So here's what we're going to cover in this video. We're going to start off with some company background. Then, how the company has been funded, their current product lineup, Eric's rumor mill, and lastly, we will end with no conclusions, but just grossly inaccurate predictions. One small disclaimer before we get started is that this video is not sponsored. I was not paid to say anything in this video. It was done on my own initiative, and I am open to any corrections or additions to anything that I happen to say here. Let's start off talking a little bit about the company itself. Ciqtek in Chinese means Guoyi Quantum, and in English, the name stands for China Instruments and Quantum Tech. Their main products appear to be electron microscopes, but they also offer other things, like gas adsorption analyzers, electron paramagnetic resonance instruments, and a line of different types of magnetic microscopes. They're located in Hefei, which is the capital of Anhui Province in China, which is just inland from Shanghai. They were formed only about 8 years ago in 2016 and boast a workforce of over 800 people. I've heard that they had plans to have an initial public offering in 2025, so you could theoretically purchase Ciqtek stock, though I'm not sure in which stock market they plan to be listed in. The number of employees and the size and scale of their product portfolio is honestly very impressive for a company this young. By comparison, Hitachi and JEOL have been making electron microscopes since the 1940s. Thermo Fisher, which was previously FEI, which was previously Philips, has been making electron microscopes since the 1930s. Zeiss was making SEMs and TEMs for a while, but closed down that portion of their business and bought back into the market 20 years ago by purchasing Leica Electron Optics. Tescan is the newest large international manufacturer on the block, and they were formed in 1991, immediately after communism collapsed in Czechoslovakia. They didn't really start expanding outside of Europe until the mid to late 2000s, so Ciqtek has done in 8 years what every other company competing in this field internationally has taken literally multiple decades to achieve. So I think that is worthy of some discussion and examination. As for selling instruments in the US, Ciqtek's reps told me at M&M 2024 that they had plans to open a sales and service office in the US in 2025 or early 2026. They also said that they would be bringing engineers from China to help support installations and maintenance. However, those plans have maybe changed. Very recently, Ciqtek has announced a partnership with JH Technologies out of California. JH Technologies currently runs a service lab and sells COSEM tabletop and small tungsten SEMs from South Korea, along with a lot of other, microscopes and other sorts of laboratory equipment. So they already have the sales and service expertise needed to sell Ciqtek products. JH Technologies has until recently been a West Coast kind of a thing, but it seems that maybe they're expanding their business. Maybe. I don't know. We'll see how that develops in the future, but as of right now, in January of 2025, it seems JH Technologies is what to watch for all things Ciqtek in the US. So how has this company grown so fast and come practically out of nowhere? Well, this was a surprise to me, but there are about 10 to 12 companies in China right now attempting to sell electron microscopes. However, there are only about 3, maybe 4 of them who have ever actually sold any real numbers of instruments, and Ciqtek is at the top of that list. However, to get an operation this large up to speed and selling internationally takes a lot of effort and a lot of money. So where did Ciqtek's money come from? Well, this company is based in China, and it is in the technology industry. So, one big question that many of their potential customers in the US are likely to have is, what is the company's relationship to the Chinese Communist Party? Or, more accurately, how much involvement does the CCP have with this company? Well, we actually have some information about that. By checking the National Enterprise Credit Information Publicity System, we can see what investors are listed for Ciqtek. We won't go through the whole list, but we can look at the first few to get a good idea of what's going on. The first is China Ventures Capital, a state-owned entity to provide investments for local Chinese industries. This makes sense that the CCP would want to invest in industries likely to compete overseas or to encourage domestic production of certain technologies. Next is the Chinese Academy of Sciences Capital, a state-owned entity to provide investments for the tech industry. IDG Capital is an interesting one since in January of 2024 it was added by the Pentagon to a list of companies linked to the Chinese military that are doing business here in the United States. However, in December of last year, it was removed from that list. The last one we'll mention is the Hefei Industry Investment, which is a local state-owned investment firm looking to provide capital to grow industries in the region. We can keep going, but I think the point is obvious that all of this company's funding so far has been from the CCP. So why do I bring this up, and why is it important? Well, there are a few reasons that I bring it up, and there are a few ways that we can look at this information. No large company, let alone one in the technology sector, can do any business without some amount of CCP involvement. This is simply the way things work in China. So if you're making literally almost anything in China, the CCP is involved to some degree or another. So depending on the way that you look at this information, it may be no big deal. After all, this is business as usual in China. However, for some customers, this may be a serious concern. The question hinges upon what you think of the CCP, or rather, how much you trust the CCP. Now, that is something for you as a customer to determine for yourself. I am not here to tell you what to think or what purchasing decisions you should or should not make. I am only here to tell you what information I have found. You may do with it whatever you want. Unfortunately, it often happens that when someone brings up any information that may be perceived as being unflattering to the CCP or Chinese-made hardware or software, etc., some people might begin making certain accusations against you, and you can likely guess what those accusations are. You are not allowed to be cautious of products from a specific place or to question the motives of certain foreign governments. Now, I am not telling you to be cautious or wary of anyone or anything. You're an adult, and you can make your own decisions. However, there are many customers in the United States who would find perfectly valid and level-headed reasons to be cautious or wary of certain products from certain places. So I will provide for you a few short examples of why some people find caution of the CCP and Chinese-made technology products to be legitimate. The highest profile example is likely TikTok and its parent company ByteDance, which actually has CCP members on its board. Whether you believe TikTok is a problem for you or not, the EU and 34 US states have prohibited government employees from installing TikTok on their work phones over fears of data security. A few years back, this article from Bloomberg really got a lot of people's attention as it detailed how the CCP went about inserting spyware chips onto printed circuit boards being manufactured in China and then exported to companies like Intel and Apple. More recently, the U.S. Coast Guard has put out some serious warnings when it discovered that Chinese-manufactured ship-to-shore cranes at ports all across the United States contained hidden modems. Lastly, TP-Link, a manufacturer of computer network equipment, is currently staring down a potential ban from the U.S. government due to serious data security allegations. I also wish to be very clear here. I am making no allegations or accusations regarding Ciqtek and data security. I have literally no information on that subject one way or the other. I'm bringing up this subject because data security concerns are one of the things that some customers in the US will have when looking to purchase large equipment like SEMs, TEMs, and FIBs from China. There will be a certain segment of the customer base in the US who will never entertain purchasing instruments from China. I'm thinking specifically about US government-funded labs, certain large customers, perhaps in the semiconductor industry, and any other customers who might be spooked by any involvement of the CCP. Of course, there will be many other segments of the market who just won't care at all. There are plenty of schools, universities, small to medium-sized companies who are always on the lookout for low-cost equipment that meet their needs. How much the CCP's involvement with Ciqtek will impact their business in the US is currently an unknown. It may prove to be a huge issue, or it may be very small. We'll just have to wait and see what happens. Next, let's take a look at Ciqtek's instruments, which I think are interesting. There are a bunch of things we can examine and extrapolate about these instruments by looking at the information they have posted online. I have also received some confidential information about some of these instruments from multiple sources around the world, and we will discuss that in Section 4. We'll start with TEMs since they have only one, a 120 kilovolt Schottky instrument, which on paper appears to be okay. That they are offering a TEM at all is fairly impressive. Zeiss, as I mentioned before, used to make TEMs back in the 70s and 80s, but not anymore. And Tescan only recently introduced a fancy weird STEM to their product line. And there's a big story behind that too, but we won't get into it. The short version is that they imported a bunch of Thermo Fisher engineers to make that happen. Basically, for a very young company to try making a TEM is a bit shocking. Even more shocking is that when I spoke to people from Ciqtek at M&M this year, they told me that they planned to add a 200 kilovolt cold source field emission TEM and a 300 kilovolt TEM to their product line in the near future. That is straight up unreal, and we'll talk more about that, why that is, in a bit. I also have heard some rumors about this specific instrument, but we'll get into that later. For right now, that's all we have for TEMs. On their website, they have 8 different models of SEM and 1 model of dual beam FIB. We won't talk about every single one of these, but there are a few that we do want to highlight. What Ciqtek appears to have done is made a flexible base instrument and then made all 9 of these instruments around that. Since I'm only dealing with images from their website and from a few other places, it's difficult to say for sure, but it appears to me as though the base platform and the specimen chamber are identical on all of these instruments. The doors on the Schottky and tungsten SEMs appear slightly different, but I believe that is simply a difference in the cover that's over the door, not in the underlying parts. Basically, these instruments will have all the same electronics, but different columns and vacuum systems. Overall, this is a smart move, reducing production time and costs. So they have 3 tungsten SEMs, which, as we just mentioned, is the same basic instrument, but with some different options. Let's focus on the top of the line model, the SEM 3300. What is interesting or unusual about this instrument is it's the first commercially sold tungsten SEM that I'm aware of that has an upper or through the lens detector. So why did Ciqtek do this, and why has no one else done it before? Well, Ciqtek says they have done this to achieve the highest resolution with a tungsten-sourced SEM, in this case 2.5 nanometers. There may be a small issue with that, however. If you look at any brochure for a tungsten hairpin SEM from any other microscope manufacturer, the best resolution you will find listed anywhere is 3 nanometers. So why is that? The stated theoretical resolution for a tungsten SEM is 3 nanometers. But for at least 10 to 15 years now, I've been aware that other microscope manufacturers have been able to obtain better than 3 nanometer resolution on some tungsten instruments. They don't advertise it because it is beyond the theoretical limit. The same thing is true with EDS detectors. Their theoretical detection limit is something like, I think it's 121 EV. I might be wrong about that, but something like that. But there are some manufacturers who have been able to achieve better than that with certain detectors for maybe like 10 years now. Again, they don't advertise it because physics says it's not possible. So I mentioned this 3 nanometer theoretical limit to one of Ciqtek's design engineers, and he didn't seem to be aware of it. He was just excited that their number was way better than everybody else's. So when I asked him what method they were using to calculate their resolution numbers, I was told, quote, the same one that everyone else in the world uses, unquote. Which is not a great answer, since literally every manufacturer uses a different method to calculate resolution, which is why you can never compare those numbers on a brochure against each other. They are apples to oranges comparisons. So Ciqtek might have kicked a hornet's nest here by claiming this 2.5 nanometer resolution, and it's going to turn around and bite them, or they might have just pushed something over that needed to fall down anyway. I don't know. I guess we'll find out. So the other question is, why hasn't any other manufacturer done this before? It sounds ingenious. Well, about 15 years or so ago, I did hear that one of the major manufacturers did this, in some tests, and they got some very good results. So why didn't they or anyone else put this idea into production? The main issue is likely cost. Tungsten instruments like this are on the lower end of the cost scale for electron microscopes. Adding this through the lens detector feature will end up adding more cost, and the benefits in resolution can't really be reflected in your brochure, as we just mentioned about the theoretical resolution limit. The issue isn't just redesigning the column to accommodate a detector up there. The instrument also needs a mechanism to send the signal up the column to reach the detector. This could be an immersion lens, or more often, stage deceleration. Without something like that to push the signal back up the column, detectors above the lens don't really work. So it all just ends up being a lot of extra cost for what should be an inexpensive instrument. And also, the image quality you're gaining from this is not gigantic. So that Ciqtek did this, I think, is really interesting, but we'll see how the SEM 3300 does out on the market. Now, these four Schottky SEMs, the SEM 4000s and SEM 5000s, and even the dual beam FIB are all fairly similar. And like the three tungsten instruments, are likely all the same base instrument, but with slightly different features. So we'll deal with them as a group. They all have electrostatic boosting type columns similar to the Gemini column. The Gemini column is an ingeniously simple design and was first put into use by Leica Electron Optics in the 1990s. Zeiss bought them out, and around 10 years ago, the patents on this design expired, and all the other manufacturers started experimenting with it, which is great. Leo and Zeiss had sat on the design for literally decades and never improved upon it, despite some serious flaws or drawbacks that it had. Now, as far as I'm aware, I believe all the major manufacturers, Hitachi, Joel, Tescan, Thermo, and Zeiss, all make microscopes using this column design. As far as I'm aware, they've all also each put their own distinctive twist on solving the problems of the original Gemini column design, like the severe pincushion distortion at low mag, etc. The fact that Ciqtek has come out with this same design is not surprising, especially because part of the appeal of that design is its simplicity. Next up, I'll look at this other unusual instrument, the HEM 6000. Ciqtek advertises this as the world's fastest scanning electron microscope, and it appears to have a very unusual design. Without actually seeing one, or seeing a picture of one with the door open, I think it's possible that they simply took one of their other Schottky SEMs and put it in a box. Why would they do that? We'll see in a minute. I believe this instrument is mainly designed around making large 2D data sets. For example, if you wanted to get a bunch of SE or BSE or maybe even STEM images of a serial section or a whole chip wafer, you would throw them in here and the stage would move around very quickly and the superfast detectors will capture images very quickly and boom, you've got your data. There are 3 different versions of this instrument, and the specs are, they're really weird. The main takeaway is that it's not designed for normal SEM samples. It's designed around automation and large batch work. It's a very specialized instrument. So specialized, in fact, that only one other manufacturer makes a similar sort of instrument, and that is the Zeiss Multisem. Zeiss claims the Multisem is actually the fastest SEM in the world, and it is also a very weird instrument designed around gathering large 2D datasets, and is also in a box. The box here is to isolate the instrument from sound and EM interference. However, Zeiss didn't just stick a Gemini column into a box, as it appears Ciqtek might have done. The multi-SEM somehow is able to split the beam up and take up to 91 images in parallel rather than in series, the way any other microscope on the planet would have to do. This is just crazy weird, but as you might imagine, it's also very niche and very specialized. So because the information on Ciqtek's HEM 6000 is very limited at this time, I can't be sure if this is just a regular SEM doing regular serial imaging, or if they are doing something fancy like Zeiss's multi-SEM with its large-scale parallel imaging. The only thing that gives me a hint about it is this note on Ciqtek's website, which says their instrument captures images 5 times faster than an ordinary SEM. So if my math is correct, if the multi-SEM takes 91 images simultaneously, that makes it 91 times faster than the average SEM. Now, I don't have any experience with the multi-SEM, so someone please correct me and enlighten the rest of us about this in the comments if I'm totally wrong about that. Lastly is this dual beam FIB. Now, aside from the fact that this simply appears to be one of their Schottky SEMs with a FIB column bolted to the side, there isn't much I've been able to find out about this instrument. FIBs are notoriously finicky and unreliable instruments, as anyone who's ever owned one knows. So because so little is known about this instrument, there's not a lot I can say about it, except that most people who are looking to purchase a FIB usually need it very badly. It's not something that people just get for the fun of it. They get it because they really need to rely on it for some sort of very serious work. So because of that, taking a chance on a brand new instrument from an unknown company will be a very difficult sell for most customers. The best thing for Ciqtek to do is to get one of these into a top research laboratory and send an engineer to sit with a bunch of PhD students and get some papers published with it. Also, if they could get one into a semiconductor manufacturer for free for maybe 6 months to try out, that would help to either shake out any bugs in the system or assure potential customers as to its capabilities. Aside from the 200 and 300 kilovolt instruments that Ciqtek says are currently in development and soon to be released, they also have another SEM in development. This will be a cold source field emission SEM. Here in the US, cold source SEMs are not that popular anymore. There are a number of reasons for that, which we won't go into right now, but it's not as popular a platform here as it used to be in the United States. So why would Ciqtek make one? Currently, the only vendor making cold source SEMs is the company who first brought the technology to the market back in 1972, and that is Hitachi. JUL used to sell cold source SEMs, but they never seemed to be able to get them to work very well, or at least not as well as Hitachi's, and so they stopped producing them about 10, 12 years ago or so. Hitachi cold source SEMs have been the standard in the semiconductor industry for the last 3 or 4 decades, and over the past 5 years or so, as the Chinese semiconductor industry has exploded, customers there have been buying up huge numbers of these systems from Hitachi. Chinese customers are drawn to Hitachi cold source SEMs for 2 main reasons. First, this is the instrument that all the big names like Intel use. But second, Hitachi is known as a quality brand, and Chinese customers are strongly drawn to foreign quality products. So this future Ciqtek cold source SEM appears as though it may be primarily aimed for domestic consumption to compete directly against Hitachi. However, we will see if they will make any progress with it outside of China. Now, in the short time I've known about Ciqtek, I've heard a bunch of rumors about this company and some of their instruments. Some of it is firsthand user experience, and some of it is totally crazy and probably definitely not true. So I'm going to go through most of it, and you can decide for yourself how plausible any of it is. Regarding these Schottky-sourced SEMs, I've heard 2 rumors. The first rumor was that Zeiss was selling completed Gemini columns to Ciqtek to use in their instruments. Now, this is almost certainly completely untrue, as it makes totally no sense at all. The other rumor that I heard is perhaps a bit more plausible, and that is that Ciqtek is not buying completed components from Zeiss, but instead are making copies of Zeiss instruments, or at least the columns. Again, I don't know that this is true, but certainly that makes a lot more sense than the other rumor. I did ask some Zeiss representatives about both of these rumors, and they said that the first rumor of them selling completed components to Ciqtek was completely false. As to Ciqtek copying the Gemini column, this Zeiss representative admitted it was certainly likely, but since the patents have lapsed on the original Gemini column design, they didn't really care, since there wouldn't be anything they could do about it anyway. Which makes sense. As I mentioned earlier, all the other manufacturers have made their own special version of the Gemini column already. The question I have about Ciqtek's design is if this is a direct copy of the original Gemini column, or if they made their own design adjustments to it. I don't know. Another wild rumor I heard about Ciqtek was regarding the 120 kilovolt TEM. Again, I don't know if this is true, but the rumor is that this system is a copy of a Thermo Fisher instrument, although it might also be a copy of an older FEI or even Philips instrument, which Thermo now owns the right to. So the rumor, apart from the system being a copy, was that this TEM had vestigial holes drilled in it. By that I mean that the original from which it was copied had holes drilled into it that are no longer needed on Ciqtek's version of the instrument. So in making a perfect copy of the original, the new instrument has holes in it that don't do anything. Now, I don't know that this is true, but it would make sense if this instrument is a copy. It may not be a copy, or it could just be a copy of an older instrument that was designed back in the 1980s and no longer has any patents on its design, like the Gemini column. Right now, this is just gross speculation, and aside from buying one and taking it apart, I'm not really sure how we can verify or debunk this rumor. As we can see, most of these rumors revolve around copying other existing instrument designs. Now, if they're true, and I'm not saying that they are, it might partially explain how Ciqtek has been able to expand so rapidly with so many instruments. But just for the sake of argument, let's say that Ciqtek is making straight-up copies of someone else's microscope. What does that mean to me? If it were true, as a consumer, as a microscope buyer, I'm not sure that makes any real impact on me. I mean, if the instruments work, then I guess they work. But if intellectual property theft is happening, the people who should be concerned are the other microscope manufacturers, even the ones whose instruments are not being copied. Now, to wrap up Eric's rumor mill, I'm going to share with you some first-hand reports I've received from people who have used these instruments. I have a report from someone who used one of the tungsten SEMs and a report from someone who used one of the Ciqtek SEMs. The user impressions of both instruments were very positive. The direct comment about the Ciqtek instrument was that it was very powerful and performed better than a test scan SEM. Those are their words, not mine, so don't blame me, test scan. But those initial positive reports should concern all of the instrument vendors. It appears these things actually work. To wrap this video up, I will not make any conclusions because I don't know enough about anything here to make any conclusions, but I can make some likely terrible predictions. I will not guarantee that any of these predictions will come true, however. Let's take a look at a few facts. First, Ciqtek is planning an IPO in 2025. They already have distributors in Korea, Mexico, the UK, mainland Europe, the Middle East, among other places. They've already announced their partnership with JH Technologies here in the US to distribute and service their instruments. They are coming. So how will they do here in the US market? As I mentioned previously, one of the main hurdles they will need to overcome are the fears of data security that some segments of the market will have, whether there is anything to those fears or not. I'm not sure how they can overcome those fears, but if anyone watching has an idea of how they can do that, let us know in the comments. I have heard some opinions from some of the other manufacturers. Many of them were not familiar with Ciqtek as a company, let alone their plans to expand into the US. So this will likely be news to a lot of them. One salesperson at a microscope manufacturer I spoke to was very dismissive of Ciqtek's chances in the US market, citing all the difficulties COSEM had trying to enter this market. COSEM, as I mentioned at the top of this video, is a South Korean manufacturer of tabletop and small tungsten SEMs currently being distributed and serviced by JH Technologies. They tried to enter the US market around 2017-ish, give or take a year there. Somebody correct me in the comments if I'm wrong about that. And they had a really bad time of it. It just did not go well for them. up until around 2021 when they partnered with JH Technologies. Since then, they seem to be doing quite a lot better, but I have no insider info on that. The main issue with COSEM, when they first entered the market, as I saw it anyway, is that they had poor sales, poor service and support, and poor marketing, leading to a very bad kickoff here in the US. It appears right now, at least, that Ciqtek is not making those types of mistakes. They have very strong marketing, a good partner in JH Technologies. We will just have to wait and see if they end up sending Chinese engineers to the US to support their instruments, which is possibly the number one issue they will need to overcome. No one knows how these instruments will work over time. Sure, it may be great upon installation, but what about 2 years from now? 10 years from now? Is it still going to be working? How much downtime are you expected to have? How easy will replacement parts be to get? Right now, we don't know. But it appears to me that Ciqtek may be taking those issues seriously. We haven't mentioned prices yet because I honestly don't know anything about their pricing. However, I'm fairly certain that these instruments will be priced low. How low? I don't know, but I'm pretty sure they will be very inexpensive. What I think will be interesting to see is what strategy Ciqtek comes in with their pricing in the US market. Will it be a low price based on their lower production costs, or will they simply attempt to undercut everyone on price regardless of their production costs just to get their foot in the door? This last strategy is one that was used by Temu. When they first came into the US market, they intentionally sold everything well below cost to entice people away from Amazon and to buy from them instead. The result was that Temu lost somewhere between $500 million and $1 billion the first year or two they were in the US market. I mean, the first 2 years each year. So eventually their prices will have to go up. But if Ciqtek adopts a similar strategy, which I don't know that they will, then that will be almost impossible to compete against. Like I said, I don't know what will happen. We will just have to wait and see. So what do I predict for the future of Ciqtek? I think they have the potential to cause serious disruption in the US market. I think they will cause even more disruption if they go really cutthroat with their prices, as I mentioned. Tescan currently offers the lowest priced SEMs here in the US, and word on the street is that they have not been doing great the past 5 years or so here in this market. I think it's possible that if things go well for Ciqtek, they might push Tescan out of the US market. And in the long term, if Ciqtek is extremely successful, I think it's possible they might put Tescan out of business worldwide. But I guess we will see. So let me know what you think. Did I get something wrong, or do you have some interesting info to add about Ciqtek? Let me know in the comments. And let everybody else know in the comments. So anyway, this is Eric Miller. Check out my website, Instructinate.com, to see all the latest news in the world of electron microscopy. Like, subscribe, and share with your microscope friends. And hey, I'll see you around the lab.